How many times that we've been in war? I was drafted in the 60s, was in the service for 5 years, but there was the Korean War. We still have troops in Korea. We are being drained. These last 10 years have been devastating to our budget. We've added $4 trillion of national debt due to our involvements overseas. So my point about all this is if we want to take care of ourselves and help ourselves at home, we need to change our attitude, change our foreign policy, and start talking about bringing our troops home to this country. You know, even if we did that immediately without changing the number of people in the military, just think of all those troops spending their money here instead of in Germany and Japan and South Korea. It might be a little bit of an economic stimulus, but we now, as a country, we spend 50% of all the money spent in the world for military weapons. Our allies spend another 15%. So 65%, no, 70%. 70% of all the money spent in the world are spent by the United States and our allies. And in Washington today, there's essentially no desire to cut 1 penny out of the military budget. And it won't work. You just can't do it. You just can't squeeze it out of child health care or even out of education. It's not going to work. This was one reason why I always liked H.R. Gross, and probably nobody here remembers H.R. Gross, but H.R. Gross was followed a philosophy very similar to mine. He was become what we used to call the old right position, and big spending and deficits bothered him no matter where they were. He thought we should live within our means. So he had a different attitude about foreign policy as well. Matter of fact, Robert Taft had that same opinion too. So sometimes people will say, well, Ron, you don't sound like a Republican talking like that. But there is a great tradition in the Republican Party that say you should have a strong national defense. And right now, I would say all this spending is undermining our economic system, and that makes us very, very vulnerable. And being in every country, we're in 140 countries, we have 900 bases, and we're not safer for this. I think we have more enemies than not. So I think foreign policy has to be changed. I think we have to talk about monetary policy. I'm convinced you can't solve your economic problems without relating it to the business cycle, how the Federal Reserve creates the business cycle, creates the bubbles and the inevitable corrections, and also we have to look at what the atmosphere has brought to us with this attitude of having so many wars going on. The war atmosphere is always an excuse to undermine your personal liberties. If you look carefully at what we're doing today, you really don't have control of your property. You don't have control of your personal liberties. The government can know everything about you anytime they went under surveillance. The Constitution was written to make sure that we knew everything about the government and that our privacy would be protected under the Fourth Amendment. Unfortunately, it's been flipped around. The government knows everything about us, and everything the government does is a secret. Matter of fact, on trying to reveal it, we praise whistleblowers in Washington, D.C. Sometimes we have votes on it. We say, oh, yeah, whistleblowers, they should be protected. We want to know the truth. But the whistleblowers are only welcome if they reveal information that they want. If they don't want, if it's embarrassing information, they don't want any whistleblower. So we need to have, as a people, a much stronger desire to know the plain truth of things. And I think we're coming around to that. I've been encouraged, especially in these last 4 years, the atmosphere has changed. I go to a lot of campuses. The young people are responding very favorably. They don't like what we're doing overseas. They don't like what they're inheriting. And we can work our way out of this. And we can have priorities. And my proposal in the campaign is that I believe this spending and the debt is so serious, and this worldwide crisis is going to be so devastating, and that the answer has to be cutting. I would cut the budget $1 trillion in 1 year to make that point. It scares people because they worry, well, what are you going to cut? Are you going to cut Social Security or health care or whatever? No, I would start with cutting a lot of the overseas spending. I don't want that money spent home. I'd say hundreds of billions of dollars there. Then start with departments like Department of Education. Why should the federal government be running our education? They did this without changing the Constitution. So I would get rid of, I have 5 departments I would get rid of. There's no need for them. We don't need the federal government telling us everything. We need a lot of deregulation. We need to essentially get rid of Dodd-Frank. We need to get rid of Obamacare. We need to get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley and let our people go to work. People say, no, that's terrible. How business people will do terrible things to consumers because they have to have regulations. That's why they behave. No, business people behave because they want customers. And they have responsibilities and liabilities. But the market is a very strict regulator. They say, well, what would you have done with the major crisis? Well, I wouldn't have bailed out anybody. The market says that if you overextended yourself and you're in trouble, why should the people bail out rich people? Why do the people get poorer? There's a characteristic about this monetary system that is taught in Austrian economics. If you steadily debase a currency, devalue the currency by just diluting it, you essentially transfer wealth from the middle class to the wealthy. And it's all the screaming and holler and close to violence that's happening today. People are seeing this, but they don't know why it's happening. They think it's just because they're successful business people and therefore we have to punish them. But this is a characteristic. Because governments create the money, it's spent by the government, so it benefits the government. Then the banks get it. Then big corporations can get it. Then the military-industrial complex gets it. Then it circulates. And then it balloons up. It increases as it circulates. And guess what the people get? They get higher prices. That's the tax. And even yesterday or Wednesday when Bernanke gave the press conference, he admitted inflation now is 4%. It's a lot higher than that. If you use the old CPI, they changed the way they calculate things if they don't look favorable. So the old CPI says prices are going up at 9%. But if you happen to be low middle income, your prices might be going up 10 or 15%. And that is a tax. And this is why the middle class get poorer and the wealthy get richer. And then it's compounded by the fact that the wealthy end up with a lot of influence in Washington and they get the bailouts. So we need a revision. People worried, well, that sounds way too much. We've got to do something immediately. I'll tell you, we've met some of these conditions in the past, and before we assumed that politicians had to act. And those recessions and depressions, the best example of this is 1921. There was a serious recession, depression, as a consequence of the inflation from World War I. And the government just kept their hands off. GDP went down 15%. When the year was over, everybody went back to work again. We hardly even read about that in our textbook. But in the 30s, there was this compulsion, both by Hoover and Roosevelt, they had to do something. And they prolonged the agony up until 1946 or 1947. And Japan has felt compelled to do that. And they're still in the doldrums. So, yes, if we did the right thing, if we'd have done the right thing in 08, it would have all been corrected. The correction would have occurred. It would have been tough, but people would be back on their feet again, working. And you have to do the rest of it. You have to have sound money. You have to deregulate. You have to have a better tax system. I mean, my best, I don't talk a whole lot about taxes because I think spending is the real problem. But the goal would be if you get spending down to a constitutional level, then the tax burden is not going to be all that complicated. Because if we really live within our means, I don't think we should have an income tax. We ought to work for that day where there's no income tax at all. We could start with getting the corporate tax much lower. I mean, business people have $1.5 trillion overseas and they bring it home and they get taxed on it. And there shouldn't be tax on that to bring their money home. And I think corporate taxes and capital gain taxes and inheritance taxes, it's all that they need the money. Because it's too big. So if you want a government that's going to police the world and you don't think entitlements should ever be cut, then this is going to continue until it all ends with a big bust. But my plan is to cut these agencies, big departments, and overseas spending, and make sure that the Social Security beneficiaries and people that need the health care and are dependent, even though the programs probably shouldn't have been started in the first place, I would take care of them. If we don't do something like that, what's going to happen is there will be tremendous more inflation, and that hits everybody, and nothing works. in this plan that I have, and it's very popular with some young people, because I think that we talk a lot about opting out of Obamacare. I'd like to give people a chance to opt out of a lot of things. I mean, in a way, we're still allowed to opt out of the school system. We still have homeschooling and private schooling. You can opt out. And I would like to see that we can opt out of just about any program we want. So for this, as an initial start, in my program, the people under 25 getting out of college, if they wanted to get opt out of the whole Social Security system, they can take care of themselves. Just think of the burden that all this, this wonderful desire to give everybody a house, what will happen? Wonderful thing to give everybody an education, let the government pay for it. The education is poor. We have indentured servants now. They come out, they don't have jobs, and they have $1 trillion worth of debt. It was all because we want to take care of people and give them well motivated. It's a rather a disastrous program. So fortunately,